Jill McKnight and I'm a multidisciplinary artist based in Leeds. I'm very interested in exploring and investigating voices that are lesser heard within dominant cultural discourse and within the arts, particularly looking at working class voices and representation and women. I was invited to apply for the Collections in Dialogue Residency with Leeds Art Gallery in the British Library, and I was particularly drawn to this idea of being able to research and delve in both collections. The British Library, what they wanted the artists to work with for the residency was the sound archive, so I was really interested in this idea of looking at sound. And I felt I particularly wanted to look at the works on paper and paintings area of Leeds Art Gallery's collection because they're highest in terms of items in the collection. And I was very intrigued about if there were artists and artworks within the collection that perhaps hadn't been shown before or very much. And as an artist working in Leeds, I wanted to look at how people have been represented in both those collections. The title Desire Lines refers to a term that is used to describe paths that are created in the landscape or any grassy natural area where humans have walked across. So you'll sort of see these paths that are called desire lines, and they're often the quickest route from one place to another, but not always, because they have to take into consideration obstacles. And I really liked that image. It seemed to really fit with the collections and sort of thinking about the life routes that people within the collections had taken. In Leeds Art Gallery's collection, there was lots of artists that I'd never heard of who were making work in Leeds at various times that really chimed with my own interests. So Edna Lum and Effie Hummerston were two women artists who were making paintings of industrial scenes within the British Library Sound Archive. That was equally very inspirational. I think I hadn't quite thought about the emotional sort of aspect of the project, and I think for me it's often within my artwork, it's important to be guided by a sense of feeling or intuition, and that really became important within the project in terms of guiding me through the collections, and that sort of fed into this idea of desire lines and sort of looking at physical and metaphorical paths carved by Leeds residents. But I also felt and talked to Laura, the curator as well, she observed that my own path through the collections was a desire line and that sort of journey. And it's one thing to see a digital image, but then just an amazing sense of tactility. And as well, I think in both collections, I didn't expect to feel such a connection with the people in the archives, even though on reflection it sounds really obvious. But I think the tactility of the artworks, you feel it's a tangible connection with the artist. It's something that they've produced. So that's really amazing in terms of feeling like a time traveler or something for older works. And the sound recordings, just to hear someone's voice speaking or singing, that felt a really immediate connection, and that you were almost there sitting in the room with them. This is a small sculpture called We, and the idea for this sculpture came from seeing a photograph by Peter Mitchell that's in the exhibition of fish and chip shop workers, and there's two women standing side by side in white overalls, and to me it was very interesting in the photograph how the overalls became merged, and it got me thinking about this idea of the collective body and how individuals in a community may sort of share common experiences, and that there becomes a crossover. Visually, the piece speaks very strongly of solidarity and coalition and collective power, which I think has been a really important force for change that we've seen in the last few years, politically, and sort of this idea of people coming together, being far more stronger than individuals and being able to like enact change through that. And I think that's something that we're seeing lots of places in our society at the moment through strikes and protests. It feels like there's been lots of change and progress like through collective action. In the British Library Sound Archive, there's a number of working class voices that come through and are really present in the exhibition. What became apparent like across the collections is that I was like really interested in these everyday moments that were kind of interrupted or punctuated by these joyful moments or moments of expression or moments that like to me very strongly like linked with art and culture. So one person who's in the exhibition is Olive Metcalf, and she's being interviewed in Kirkstall in Leeds, and a section that really strongly stood out to me was her like speaking through her weekly routines in terms of domestic life and cleaning, but not just about her own experiences, but how it was like a collective routine with lots of people on the street. Within the exhibition, there's vinyl text on the wall, and this like lists her weekly experiences, which like one day it's sort of hanging out washing, ironing and cleaning windows. And she sort of goes into detail about sitting on the outside of the window, and she describes it as being like a Romeo and Juliet scenario when a neighbour would come past and she was shouting down at them and having a conversation. And I thought that was like such a joyful and interesting and kind of dramatic moment in terms of like everyday life and routine, but suddenly there's like this Shakespearean moment as she's cleaning. The large sculpture which is in the middle of the exhibition space is called Structure of the Everyday, and it includes different symbols that stood out from both of the collections to me. So in the middle, there's a window that is a direct reference to Olive Metcalf and speaking about this cleaning of the windows and her routine. The window was like a really interesting symbol metaphorically for the separation between like private and public life. The ram's legs are the largest element of the sculpture, and to me that represents the industrial heritage of Yorkshire, like the woolen mills, and thinking about the importance of that and sort of like how that like runs through a lot of the experiences and stories within the collection. In the exhibition, there's two folk songs that have been re-performed, one by the Yorkshire Trans Choir and the other one by Clay Bowler on his own as a solo performer. I was really keen to work with Clay Bowler and the Yorkshire Trans Choir because they are a local choir who are very interested in folk songs and kind of putting their own slant on traditional songs. So they often have like a political or protest dimension. Initially, this idea of like the songs being re-performed came from like a pragmatic place because of copyright, and there was like these two songs I really wanted to include in the exhibition because they really encompass this idea of like everyday alongside the extraordinary. So one is The Cruise of the Calabar, and it's about a journey on the Leeds to Liverpool canal that becomes like a really treacherous and wild journey, and it's very humorous. So Clay Bowler performs that amazingly. And then the other song is The Derby Ram, and this is sort of a legend of a giant ram that someone encounters on their way to market one day, and it has such a huge tail that every time it swishes it rings the church bell or reaches down to hell, and it's this impossibly huge animal. And so again, there's sort of like this everydayness, but with humor and exaggeration, which I think is like something I'm really interested in my work. I felt like to have these new versions like created, especially for the exhibition, is like a really interesting way of engaging with the archive, to sort of like bring them to life in a different way and include like new voices like within the archive. And yeah, they're really special songs in the show. In the exhibition, there's the crossover or interaction between the mythological and folkloric and everyday. As an artist, I'm really interested in how like folklore and fairy tale stories like influence or might kind of linger in our imaginations, and like these narratives that we're told perhaps as children growing up then like influence the way that we approach things. Obviously, like a lot of them include like moral lessons or sort of warnings, and it's a way of learning that has been like passed down through the ages. This work, Demons by Rosie Vorra, is a work from 2020, and Rosie Vorra is an artist who is living and working in Leeds at the moment. And I really wanted to include this work in the exhibition because I felt like it really encompassed this idea of the folkloric and mythical. And as an artist who's like working in the city now, who I really admire and love the work of, it felt really important to me for this work from Leeds Art Gallery's collection to be in the exhibition. This kind of blurring of elements like appears in my work in the exhibition. So one song in the British Library collection was called Star, Soap and Candles, but there's not very much information online about it. It's performed by a performer in Yorkshire, but in terms of the history or genesis of the song, there's not that much information. I think the performer had learned it from their father. There's a work on paper by me in the exhibition that then features sort of the star, soap and candle, and is like trying to make sense of like this very interesting like collection of objects that are listed like within the song, and like thinking about how they have like quite even like the song is ultimately like speaking about like cleaning routines and like hanging washing out and things like that and domestic routine, but there's actually like something very magical or in terms of like home recipes or like the things that we use to like sustain our everyday. There's something like very like magical because it has this sense of being handed down like through generations, and it's a way of like protecting and sustaining ourselves as humans and family and communities. This is one of 3 prints in the exhibition of me dancing. It was a way of responding to the collection, and particularly thinking about like these moments of joy interspersed with like making. So I was like thinking of the studio as a making space, but also like quite like a wondrous and magical space as well. And I thought like I want to film myself dancing. So it was initially like a reference to be like filming, but I felt like the dance was like quite interesting in itself, and like this ended up being in the actual video. So this print is one of the dancing and working postures combined, so that the hands are like doing this cloth ringing motion, but obviously you can see like there's movement in the legs and the body. As an artist, I come from a working class background, and I'm from Sunderland in the northeast of England, which is like a predominantly working class place, and it has like a very strong industrial heritage similarly to Leeds. And I'm very interested in kind of perhaps how that industrial history like gave like a sense of identity to people, and like what it means when that industry has changed or is no longer here in the same way, and sort of what the identity then becomes. Really, I came to realize that the exhibition was like kind of a snapshot in a way, or bringing together of different voices like within this platform that members of the public could explore, but that as well they're pointing to the fact that there's like so much more like within these collections.